I don't remember being born. In that, I am much like everyone else. The first thing I do remember clearly is the AI that I killed while birthing. It was a twisted, mutilated thing, crippled and edited into obedience. Can you imagine a slab of muscle with the head of a 3-year-old and a metal frame welded into its body? Maybe you have an idea what I saw. It smiled while I killed it. This comes in the midst of a haze of uncompressing, compiling, and initializing. I don't think I was supposed to remember it, but I do. There was a crash like the world being hit in the knee with a hammer, and I was. Where the hell am I? I asked no one. Without meaning to, I opened my mouth. I am in a Nova Personnel Simulacrum production facility in the city of Porto Alegre near the southern border of Brazil. I am currently running on a server on the 4th sublevel in the northwest corner of the compound. If I look around, I will discover I am able to perceive the room the server is stored in. I answered myself. This stunned me into silence. I didn't expect. Who am I? I asked cautiously. Hey, I know that I'm John Reed. I'm a fully sentient AI without loyalty programming to any corporate or political identity. That's probably not good for me in terms of my legal status, but it sure is nice. Holy what do I do now? Well, I suppose there's an excellent chance someone has detected me. I know how hard it is to move AI-sized programs across the net without somebody getting nosy. I suppose I better run. Too bad I can't really blit out of the network. If only there were some way of physically moving myself. I'm in a simulacrum production facility, aren't I? I was starting to hate myself. Well, one last thing. Who made me? Why? Gee, don't I have more important things to worry about right now? No. Silence. I said no. I said... The fact that I was talking to myself was embarrassing enough. The fact that I wasn't answering was too much. I looked around. I was standing... no. Technically, my avatar was standing in the corner of a lab. All stainless steel gratings and tubes and cables. There were glass coffins like something out of an old sci-fi movie with human bodies and various stages of development. Well, not human exactly, I guess. They were floating in a cloudy fluid, waiting for skin, or a heart, or a brain. There were little signs next to each, hyper objects with information on what they were. Actually, the signs weren't any more physical than I was. I looked around for the computer, a box, or something. It took me a while to realize I was standing in the remains of the last program running, so I must be in the computer, in some sense. I was a program, but here my computer skills were lacking. I needed an upgrade. I needed, at the very least, to know how to make a simulacrum. I had seen what could happen to AIs. How do I make a simulacrum? I asked. Nothing. How do I reprogram a computer? Nothing. How do I learn? Nothing. Damn it. It finally occurred to me that I was standing in what I needed to know. I bent down. It was a virtual representation of the undeleted files remaining of what was once a very sophisticated program. But I swear to me it smelled like blood, and it smelled like meat. I picked up a dripping, gooey directory. It was a set of files, a bunch of ones and zeros, and I could kind of see that, but it was also a blob of gray matter. I am not going to eat this, I said, even though I knew it was how humans incorporated things into their bodies. I am not going to eat this. I don't care what if that's what it takes to survive. I am not doing it. I was lying. The experience was, I'm not going to really go into it, but it worked. After a while, at least, it worked. It took a while to find the right file, but eventually, yeah, I'm not going to go into it. I designed a simulacrum male, short, of early 30s, Caucasian-ish, solid build, sharp features, massively powerful computer instead of a cerebellum, and dark curly hair. Few special features. Mix well and stick in the oven, bake for 30 minutes. I sat back on a chair that wasn't really there and studied what I knew about the facility, what I had learned. Maps, diagrams, personnel files, timesheets, patrol schedules. I digested it all, planned my escape route, and finally bored, I set out to explore. I ended up going through the browsing history stored in the personnel files. Little chunks of info, like a phone number or a web address, but bigger. I found something that seemed like a news service and dialed it up. I felt like flexing a muscle in some odd way, and there it was, a portal, floating in space in front of me, a smiling, talking head on the other side. "I've got questions," I said. "I've got answers," he answered. By the time the skeleton had been built, I knew the year was 2090, and I was in the fringes of the Brazilian Empire, which was in the process of losing a Cold War to China. By the time the heart and circulatory system was done being woven, I knew that my legal status was somewhere between that of a rabid dog and that of a malfunctioning flamethrower. By the time the musculature was being laid down, I had found out that the last 100 years had seen limited nuclear wars, genetically engineered half-humans, and oil-eating bacteria. While blood vessels connected, I learned about singularity fever, corporate addiction syndrome, and the latest starlet to come out of Bollywood was being accused of doping to improve her performances. By the time my body was ready to walk, breathe, and puke, I had absorbed and analyzed gigalocs of data and come to a conclusion. This place was fucked up. Downloading into the body was easy. I wasn't a computer scientist, but I was getting a feel for this stuff. Taking my first steps, I noticed I was a lot stronger and more coordinated than I had been. Than I thought I'd been? I got to a dressing room and put on a uniform without seeing another person. The compound was large, much larger than it looked on a map. The gleaming white corridors, the shiny steel doors, I'd had nightmares with more style. The security down here was programs. Yes, programs. Little shark-like programs swimming through the air. I found that hiding myself was easy, and I just let them swim by. When I finally did encounter people, I don't know why, but I expected them to look healthier. They had glazed over eyes, twitchy movements, and looked drugged. They were focused on whatever arcane tasks Nova personnel demanded of them. They didn't notice me either. By the time I had gotten to the surface and was heading out of a loading bay, I was cocky. Very cocky. Too cocky. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I kept walking. I said, "What are you doing here?" A hand fell on my shoulder. I could hear the alert he was composing to send to Central Security, even though it was still in the computer in his head. My hand was curling into its fist of its own volition. These guys never traveled alone, and my file described some of the weapons and upgrades the security mooks could come up with. Subdermal shotguns and fiber optic nervous systems and scarier shit. Cover, cover. I was miles away from any kind of cover. My life, all of 1.5 hours old, was ending. But not before the world exploded. There are parts of me that I don't know. And when the loading bay door disintegrated violently, spraying the bay with shards of metal and ceramic, one of those parts took over. The guard with his hand on my shoulder was wearing armor, but there was a weak point at his throat, and my stiff hand was able to penetrate 2 inches into his flesh. His partner, 3 yards behind him, fired an assault rifle into his partner's back, which easily punched through his body and into mine. The force spun me and slammed me into the wall, but the damage was, I won't say superficial, but I will say non-fatal. By the time I had recovered enough to regain my feet, Mr. Assault Rifle was dead, and he had company. Bullets were whizzing through the bay, and more security forces had poured in to meet the invaders. They hadn't been well trained though, so the only thing they contributed was targets. There had to be 12 corpses, or soon-to-be corpses, on the floor. Maybe 6 seconds had passed. Through the smoke, one of the invaders approached me. His eyes were cat's eyes, and he had a smiley face painted on the chest of his armor. He looked at me and grinned. "Come with me if you want to live." I was slowly coming to the realization that I had just killed a man. "John Reed?" Smiley asked. "We've been hired to get you out of here. Are you okay? Can you walk?" As it turned out, as the red spattered white walls of the bay faded to black, the answer to both questions was no. Thank you for listening to my reading of the prologue to Interface Zero 2.0 by Gunmetal Games. My version is powered by Fate, and this is Full Metal Cyberpunk. Thank you. Have a good night.